Canva just acquired the motion graphics software Cavalry and made it completely free instead of the previously existing pricing of a free limited version and a full premium version, which you could subscribe to for around £200 a year. And I've actually already been using Cavalry for over a year now to create motion graphics like titles, explanatory visuals, and smaller stuff like animated graphics showing hotkeys from tutorials and call to action overlays. I created all of these using the free version of Cavalry, so I'm really excited about having gained access to all of the previously premium exclusive features due to the Canva acquisition. So in this video I will tell you what I think about these premium features we now all have access to, and will also tell you what you can expect from Cavalry and give some tips on how you can make the most out of this software. I will also go over the major current culprits of Cavalry, so you know for which tasks you should probably use another software. But let's start with the good stuff. What makes Cavalry special and where it performs best? Cavalry is entirely built around creating 2D motion graphics. Where it especially excels here is how it handles rather fundamental but complex or niche tasks to create motion graphics. For example, how you can easily distribute a shape on a grid and animate each individual instance with just a few clicks. For this, you just need the duplicator, which lets you instance the shape on predefined patterns or custom shapes, and the auto animate tool, which animates instances and offsets their timings. And by using this auto animate tool on text, you can also create text animations much quicker than in other software. Though I will have to say that the option to change in which order the text characters are being animated is a bit hidden in the second tab of the tool. But speaking of text, you have a lot of different utilities to dynamically change the content of a text element. For example, you could randomly cycle between characters or create stuff like countdowns. Another pretty essential part of a motion design software is how it handles keyframes and easings, as by right-clicking on a keyframe, you can use the magic easings to add anticipation, overshooting, and bounciness to your animation, apart from the more rudimentary easings. Of course, you can also manually adjust the animation curves. And by right-clicking, you can also make a keyframe animation loop without having to deal with expressions like in After Effects. On a side note, I also want to point out that I really like how Cavalry manages color palettes. You can easily create color palettes by just dragging colors around, import existing color palettes, and you're also able to dynamically generate color harmonies to create stuff like monochromatic color palettes. And applying colors to shapes in your scene is just as easy, as you can just drag them onto them in the viewport. Oh, and by the way, you can also add a more complex appearance to your shapes by using shaders to give them gradients, procedural noise textures, and more, which works for both the fill and the outline of each shape. Another really big part of Cavalry are its deformers, which kinda work like modifiers from Blender or tags from Cinema 4D. Those allow you to change the shape of an object by subdividing it, beveling it, morphing it into other shapes, and much more. The list of deformers is pretty long, so it's quite easy to get overwhelmed, especially since it's not always obvious what a deformer actually does or how it works. But once you figured that out, you can create complex animations. Especially because Cavalry allows you to control the parameters with other parameters or so-called behaviors and utilities, which, for example, you can use to add randomness to a parameter. On the other hand, you can also add filters to shapes, which are essentially raster effects like blurs, film grain, and vignettes. Though I have to say that the performance of those is usually pretty slow. But luckily, you can enable playback cache or lower the viewport quality to deactivate those post-processing effects while working. I will give more details on performance and playback later on, but first we will move on to the exclusive features of the previously existing Pro version which we now all have access to for free. So let's start by going over the most relevant features. On one hand, we have some fundamental limitations that have now been lifted, like being able to work in resolutions above 1080p and to export in all available formats, which means you also gain access to the LoDi export, which is used to display 2D animations on the web. It also includes the export of videos with audio tracks, which recently also has been locked behind a paywall. Though I have to add that working with audio in Cavalry didn't feel that great, as I experienced it being hard to sync something to audio since I wasn't able to change the height of the displayed waveform, and the start of it was visually blocked by the text displaying the name of the audio file. Oh, and now you also have the ability to configure custom hotkeys and use the control center, where you can essentially bookmark important settings in your project and gather them in a dedicated window. But let's head on to the more exciting features like the Forge Dynamics. This is basically a solver for physics-based 2D animations, where you can use stuff like rigid body and soft body simulations for 2D shapes. It also enables you to let shapes interact with each other by configuring what should happen when they collide with each other. For example, you can make shapes bounce off of each other and also make them change their color or transform on contact with another shape. And that's probably the most exciting feature that became free recently, as physics can be a pretty essential part of motion design, and yet big competitors like After Effects don't have a solution for that doesn't rely on third-party plugins. My only issues with the Forge Dynamics currently are that I experienced text not staying in its layout when each character should be treated as an individual object, and that previews happen to be inconsistent. There is a caching feature for the Forge Dynamics, but while working with that, it sometimes led to other inconsistencies. Other than that, it is a great and fun to use feature. Up next is gaining access to particle systems. Those allow you to generate instances of a 2D shape over time, again being controlled by customizable physics. You can alter the motion of the particles by using modifiers, which include stuff like vortex fields to add rotation, turbulence fields to add noise to the particle's movement, and you can also use these modifiers to make particles be attracted to something or make them follow a path. And Cavalry also supports controlling other essentials of particle systems, like configuring a lifetime for the particles and use that to drive the particle's size and color. Though the particle system apparently is still experimental, so I also frequently experienced inconsistencies in the viewport even when using the particle's disk cache. So it has similar limitations as the Forge Dynamics feature, especially when trying to use motion blur on the particles, as in my experience it led to even more inconsistencies, especially when it came to the speed of the particles. Even though you can definitely achieve cool results with the current state of Cavalry's particle system, I found it pretty frustrating to work with and it didn't feel production ready. So as of now, I would just call the particle system a nice to have experimental feature. You also gain access to more options for the deformers and filters of Cavalry. These include stuff like being able to bend shapes, make them squish or stretch to add impact and exaggeration to animation, glow, chromatic aberration, pixel sorting, a Voronoi noise shader, and more. Apart from new deformers and filters, you also get new shapes, like the mesh tool, which you can use to add vertices to an image or shape to deform it, draw contours from an image using the isoline shape, or use the shortest path shape, where you can distribute points, like when you would use the duplicator, and then create connections from the points to an existing shape. There really are a bunch of new deformers, filters and shapes, but these pretty much are the highlights. My personal highlight though is being able to add extrusion effects to give 2D shapes a bit more depth. And speaking of depth, you also are able to add a camera to create 2.5D scenes. Of course I was excited to see whether the extrusion effect would work with that, but it doesn't. Honestly, the camera feature feels pretty limited, as unlike in After Effects, you can't add lights or depth of field, but it can be used to add perspective to your scenes or create cool zoom effects. For those of you who try to get more of an alternative to the compositing side of After Effects, you also gain access to Cavalry's tracking tool. Though it is entirely a planar tracker, which means you create a few tracking points to track a surface, which you can then use for stuff like displaying your animation on walls of camera recorded footage. So it's pretty basic, but at least it is quite easy to use and works well. But let's move on to another one of the big features, which is the Dependency Graph. This basically is a node-based editor for Cavalry. So instead of working with layers, you add objects as nodes and then connect them with different deformers, shapes and behaviors. And as a big fan of node-based workflows, I'll have to say that I'm a bit disappointed here. It still feels very clunky to use and honestly slowed down my workflow instead of speeding it up. But as the Dependency Graph is still a pretty fresh feature, I hope that this will change in the future. To clarify what exactly disappointed here is that it isn't as straightforward to use in terms of how you're supposed to add new nodes or where connections belong to achieve your desired result. You can feel that the Dependency Graph is a feature that has been added later on, as it isn't as nicely integrated into Cavalry as the usual layer-based workflow. Like, sometimes I switch back to the layer editor to change the easings, and when going back into the Dependency Graph, it would make the corresponding node disappear. So currently the Dependency Graph feels more like a demonstration of what could come in the future. And the last thing I want to mention regarding the premium features is the ability to automate parts of your workflow by being able to import Google Sheets to create data-driven animations and to import folders containing video, image and audio assets, which you can drop into your timeline to reference specific files from them. And you also get the ability to work with JavaScript, which, as someone who knows their way around web design, I've learned to avoid at all costs. Of course, you have a lot of amazing, near-endless options by being able to work with JavaScript. The only question is whether you want to go that path. As everything that has to do with coding, it will be a total game changer for some people, while most people will probably just ignore it. But either way, it is a feature that really extends the capabilities of Cavalry. All of these features probably sound a bit overwhelming, and you might wonder how you're supposed to learn that software. Well, apart from official and community-made tutorials, there is this website called scenery.io, where you can browse through a lot of user-generated Cavalry content and download their project files. And the best part here is that you can see which features of Cavalry have been used to create a scene, and you can even filter the website for specific features. So if you find a feature in Cavalry that you don't understand, you can just search for it on that website and take a look at how other people used it and take a look at their project file if you want to. So ultimately, an extremely cool collection of resources to learn from. So now let's finally get to the current issues of Cavalry. As I mentioned before, one of the main issues currently is the playback and preview. It can be inconsistent when working with forged dynamics or particles, and it gets really sluggish when using a bunch of the post-processing filters. And it often feels like the filters aren't really that optimized. For example, adding a vignette or film grain can drastically slow down the playback, but you can easily create way more optimized versions of these effects by using a gradient as a vignette or just use the noise shader as film grain. Sure, we have playback cache, but it only starts caching once you start the playback instead of starting to cache in the background like in After Effects. And even the most subtle change to your scene requires you to cache the entire scene again, as the playback cache only works for the entire composition. This makes Cavalry not really suitable for bigger projects and animations without splitting everything in a lot of sub-compositions or pre-rendering some stuff. And another really big culprit of Cavalry honestly results from the user's expectations of the software. As many people see it as an After Effects alternative, they expect it to have similar capabilities when it comes to compositing. But Cavalry really isn't built for compositing that exceeds very basic needs. You can definitely integrate some 2D animations into existing footage, but that's also where it pretty much ends. Cavalry really doesn't have too many tools for compositing, even when it comes to more basic tasks like color grading. So if you want an After Effects alternative for compositing, you should rather use DaVinci Resolve and its integration of Fusion, or use Blender. By the way, did you know I have a free and open source pack for Blender's compositor called MPComp that adds over 140 different effects to the compositor, like VHS emulation, glitch effects, film emulation, displacement effects, and color grading? If you're interested in that, take a look in the description. What also speaks against using Cavalry for compositing is how it handles importing footage. I experienced a lot of multiple minutes long freezes when importing videos or image sequences, so don't expect being able to work with longer videos here. So to summarize everything, I think Cavalry is one of the best choices out there for 2D motion design, and it's fantastic that it is completely free now, as the previous pricing used to be the main point to criticize Cavalry for. When it comes to compositing, on the other hand, you should definitely choose a different software currently. In my workflow, I often use Cavalry in combination with DaVinci Resolve. Anytime I need a 2D animation, which would be very exhausting or complex to create in Resolve, I instead use Cavalry to create it and then further process it in DaVinci Resolve. Also, the developers of Cavalry did talk about being interested in releasing a Linux version in the past, as it currently only exists for Windows and macOS, though it is uncertain whether the Canva acquisition will make a Linux release more or less likely. That was everything from my end. Like and hype this video if you want to, and submarine to my channel. Have a wonderful day, bye.